This is Law of Attraction Explored. I'm Tim Grimes. If you'd like a free guide that explains the hidden link between relaxation and the law of attraction, or if you want more information about my books or my coaching, you can visit radicalcounselor.com. Enjoy the episode. As we often touch upon in this podcast, these law of attraction ideas are very malleable. When we get too stuck in trying to derive a certain meaning from a law of attraction concept, a lot of the time we inadvertently miss the meaning. We have to be flexible. We have to be open-minded. We have to be willing to use our intuition and use our whole mind and body, and not just our intellectual mind, in order to really benefit most from these teachings, in my opinion. And I would think that if you're listening to this show and have been implementing these ideas into your life for a long enough time, you very likely agree with me. One of the interesting things that has happened the last couple of years is that Neville Goddard's teachings have become much more widespread, as we've already discussed on the show, and which I've discussed a lot on my YouTube channel. And something that's so interesting is exactly what Neville talks about in regards to mistaking what is meant to be allegorical as literal, often now seems to happen to his work when we see it interpreted on social media and in other mass market avenues, one could say. For instance, really fascinating ideas like everyone is you pushed out, or your assumption becomes your reality. Fascinating concepts that Neville talked about, especially early in his career, in a very pragmatic, down-to-earth way, are now interpreted often so literally that they lose their vitality and their original power, which Neville gave to the advice by being so dynamic in how he explained it. So today I thought it would be worthwhile just to look at this a little bit more by reading a bit from Neville's most practical work. I think most of us would agree. And I've mentioned this before. It's just 5 lessons, which is, of course, just a collection of 5 lessons he gave in Los Angeles in, I believe, 1948. And the entire 5 lessons also includes 36 questions and answers at the end of the lessons. So I thought we would read from really the first page, the first few paragraphs. We're just going to read a section of them from 5 lessons. And then we're going to read the last question, the 36th question from 5 lessons. And it's going to tie together what we're talking about nicely, I think. I think that we'll benefit from looking at this. So let me just first briefly read from the first page of 5 lessons. First of all, Neville says, this is going to be a very practical course. Therefore, I hope that everyone in this class has a very clear picture of what he desires, for I am convinced that you can realize your desires by the technique you will receive here this week in these 5 lessons. He then goes on to say how the Bible is meant as metaphorical and not literal. And a few paragraphs later says, throughout the centuries, we have mistakenly taken personifications for persons, allegory for history, the vehicle that conveyed the instruction for the instruction, and the gross first sense for the ultimate sense intended. In other words, Neville argues that we take the Bible too literally, or that many of us have taken the Bible too literally. Humanity has taken the Bible too literally and not interpreted it dynamically, mystically, one could say, and also practically in the way that Neville explains in 5 lessons. And if for some reason you have not read 5 lessons, I strongly recommend you read or listen to the audiobook version of this book, because it's perhaps Neville's best work. It's truly amazing teachings that he gives in 5 lessons. And as I said, these days, the very dynamic and intuitive concepts that Neville often talked about are mistaken for being very literal, or to quote Neville, We take them literally instead of for the ultimate sense intended, the dynamic intention of what Neville was talking about. It's as if we've watered down Neville's great advice by making it too simple. Instead of being simple, which a lot of Neville's advice, especially in 5 lessons, is simple to understand. But instead of just making it simple, as Neville did, we've made it simplistic, overly simplistic, and have missed the point. So now I want to read the last question from the many questions and answers that Neville was asked after he gave these 5 lectures. And the last question is, how could one who was deprived in his youth become a success in life? And listen to Neville's answer, because it is truly a great answer and really summates so much of what Neville teaches in a beautiful way. So here is Neville's answer. Neville says, "We are creatures of habit, forming patterns of the mind which repeat themselves over and over again. Although habit acts like a compelling law which drives one to repeat the patterns, it is not a law, for you and I can change the patterns. Many successful men, such as Henry Ford, Rockefeller, and Carnegie, were deprived in their youth. Many of the great names in this country came from poor families, yet left behind them great accomplishments in the political, artistic, and financial world. One evening, a friend of mine attended a meeting for young advertising executives. The speaker of the evening said to these young men, 'I have but one thing to say to you tonight, and that is to make yourself big, and you cannot fail.' Taking an ordinary fishbowl, he filled it with 2 bags, one of English walnuts and the other of small beans. Mixing them with his hand, he began to shake the bowl and said, 'This bowl is life. You cannot stop it shaking, as life is a constant pulsing, living rhythm. But watch.' And as they watched, the big walnuts came to the top of the bowl as the little beans fell to the bottom. Looking into the bowl, the man asked, 'Which one of you is complaining?' asking why. Then added, 'Isn't it strange the sound is coming from the bowl and not the outside? A bean is complaining that if he had the same environment as the walnut, he too would do big things, but he never had the chance.' Then he took a little bean from the bottom of the bowl and placed him on top, saying, 'I can move the bean through sheer force, but I cannot stop the bowl of life from shaking.' And as he shook the bowl, the little bean once again slid to the bottom. Hearing another voice of complaint, he asked, 'What's that I hear? You are saying that I should take one of those big fellows who thinks he is so big and put him on the bottom and see what happens to him? You believe he will be just as limited as you because he will be robbed of the opportunity of big things just as you are? Let's see.' Then the speaker took one of the big walnuts and pushed him right down to the bottom of the bowl, saying, 'I can't stop the bowl from shaking.' And as the men watched, the big walnut came to the top again. Then the speaker added, 'Gentlemen, if you really want to be successful in life, make yourself big.' My friend took this message to heart and began to assume he was a successful businessman. Today, he is truly a big man if you judge success by dollars. He now employs over 1,000 people in the city of New York. Each one of you can do what he did. Assume you are what you want to be. Walk in that assumption, and it will harden into fact." Just some great practical wisdom from Neville. Truly brilliant advice. And you see how, based on pragmatic, psychological principles, it is. He's not trying to be esoteric here when he says that assume something and it will come to pass. He's saying become big in your own mind. Make yourself big. And I think these days we hear so much of Neville's advice on social media, and it seems complicated, like everyone is you pushed out. And the reality is, you don't have to look at it in such a way. You can look at it in the very simple way that Neville explains time and time again in 5 lessons. In one of those ways, a great way to apply this law of attraction advice is simply to make yourself big.